Let's talk about some of the problems AI is creating for PPC agency owners. So, I'm Ryan Baker. I'm the founder of Kingly Consulting, and I have helped more than 30 agencies increase their revenue and retention in their PPC service. I have noticed in my work that there is an emerging problem. So, AI has swept the industry. People are adding it into everything, and you have early adopters, as usual, who are just grabbing it and running and starting entire agencies centered around AI and automation. You have people completely outsourcing PPC management into AI led, AI driven automation, which has pros and cons depending on the accounts. You have people who are anti AI and they're still doing, manual bidding in their SCAGs. And you know what? If it works, great. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. The problems I'm seeing the most, or some of the most painful problems, actually center around hiring. So whether you're running a lot of AI based management or operations or not, you're going to have people in your agency. We're not at the point where you can just have an AI run agency that manages everything with AI and it all works out. You're still running into problems even with a company that has AI as sophisticated as Google's AI. You're still getting wild amounts of misinformation, like for how to manage, including differences between how their AI assistant will tell you to solve a problem versus how a seasoned expert will tell you how to solve the problem versus how their reps tell you how to solve the problem. And there's several different approaches based on someone's experience, and you don't really know until you test, right? So the problems that AI is causing now have more to do with identifying the good help on one hand. So, you put up a job listing and you get all these resumes that look fantastic, that sound fantastic, that have all the right keywords in them. You don't know if it's AI or not, if the person knows to remove M dashes. You can guess, and a lot of times it is. A lot of times it's not. So who knows? Um, you have the other issue where you have competent people who have experience, who know their stuff, but they're burnt out because they have the dopamine addiction that comes with all the technology and all the instant gratification we have now. And if you can turn over a massive assignment to AI, to Gemini, to ChatGPT, to Claude, why on earth would you do the thinking yourself? The brain wants the easiest path to the completed solution, and it looks really good. And sometimes it is really good, but sometimes it's not. And so you don't always have that ability to tell quickly whether somebody knows what they're doing or not until you've spent some time with them, which makes it really difficult to hire good help. So, on one hand, you've got people that look like they know what they're doing. On the other hand, you have people that do know what they're doing, but then you have the issue of them outsourcing their thinking. So they're like, you know what, I'm burnt out, I'm tired, like I don't want to sit down and analyze all this data. I'm going to feed this spreadsheet into ChatGPT or, Gemini, whatever. I'm going to have it analyze it and tell me what to do. And then they're copy pasting the output of a new chat without training. Sometimes they're like a little more AI savvy and they'll do some training of a GPT or something, and that's great. But you still often get a copy paste, with no QA at all, and that's another problem. A third problem is if you yourself are not a PPC expert and you're trying to hire good PPC help. I mean, how do you know if they have AI and they're just using it to answer, hey, give me a great response to this job listing, give me a great cover letter, give me something to say that will give me the highest likelihood of getting this job. And then, if you go in, you interview them, You're asking things like, hey, tell me about a time that you had an account that was performing poorly and you had to improve it quickly. Like, what did you do? And they are either doing some homework ahead of time, which is funny that they'll put the work into this, where they're looking at like, okay, ChatGPT, tell me all the things that I'm most likely to be asked in an interview and give me good responses. And they're training themselves up on how to interview. So, they'll come in and they'll be like, well, I'll look at conversion tracking first. Of course, have to do that. I'd probably want to look at like account structure and make sure that, we're following a lot of the best practices toward, consolidating data into as few campaigns as possible and then add some negatives to remove waste. And like they're saying the right things. But then you're like, okay, man, this is somebody that knows their stuff. It's good. They've got their priorities in place. Then you hire them. 3 months in, you're like, hey, I couldn't help but notice you're adjusting budgets and CPA targets. I haven't seen you add a single negative keyword. And they're like, oh yeah, well, I want to do the things that really have impact, or they'll blow smoke, in some way. So you end up with people that look like they know what they're doing, and maybe they even do know what they're doing, but they've gotten lazy, or they are just relying on AI to tell them what to do, and the AI is fed on so much like conflicting information that most of the time it's not going to be able to tell them the right thing. So these three problems all kind of bleed into AI telling us what to do and us relying on AI to give us the answers. So there are ways to avoid this if you're hiring. So one of the things that I've done is I have seen this problem. I've helped hire good PPC help over the years. I've helped to place PPC directors. I've helped to place like entry level people from overseas, and I've started to notice what works, what doesn't, and some of the more important things that help an agency identify good help. So one of those things, usually the standard hiring practice is, okay, I'm hiring a Google Ads manager, right? I want to send them an account, have them audit that account, and then I'll look at the audit and I'll decide whether they know their stuff or not. Um, which is not bad, because that gives you a good idea of what they view as important and so on. And then you do an interview, maybe, and then you hire them based on how well they do in the interview and the understanding that they know their stuff because of the audit. So the problem with that is that even before AI, the audit didn't. It told you that they know how to look at an account or how they like identify problems or opportunities, but it didn't tell you if they knew how to do the work. And that was one of the problems I kept running into like earlier on in my hiring is I would hire somebody who seemed competent or they seemed smart or they knew what, to say, um, how to look at an account. They knew the theory, but they didn't know the practice. It's like getting like a Google Ads certification. You can answer questions, about OptiScore, but you don't know how to do the work until you get in and you start getting experience. So even a brand new ad manager with their Google Ad certifications, they're certified, but to do what? To spout Google Ads, adoption rhetoric. So it's not a sign of a good ad manager. So to be able to find that, I developed a test. I was like, okay, so audits aren't doing the trick because they come in, they don't know how to manage the account. The certifications, we can't look at that as a positive signal necessarily. So especially because you could just Google the answers. So the thing that I looked at actually was search terms. Okay, so can they look through a search terms report and tell me which ones are irrelevant, which ones they should exclude based on a small amount of relevant information? And that I've kind of developed over time, but I found that immediately disqualified like 75% of applicants because I was looking for people who were adding like phrase match, negatives or broad match or something other than just the whole query in exact match, because I'm like, okay, This tells me if they're adding, phrase match with the smallest irrelevant n-gram, that they are actually, somewhat competent. They can use their brain. They can recognize, okay, these are irrelevant, or, these are outside of scope or whatever. So the other thing over time I realized is that, this can, with AI, this can be, answered. This can be, just like, hey, plug and play. AI, tell me the answers, and what should I put in this column? What should I put in this column? Um, if you get something like that for a test like this, then you at least know that they know how to use AI to do the work, and they're still technically qualified for the role. If it's an entry level, role, they at least can do the bare minimum of search term review. And so, if they then go above and beyond and are like, hey, you should actually add this as a target keyword if it's not already, or they say something like that, that's a win. I always include in my tests a search term that is outside the target geography. And then I specify in the instructions, what the target geography is, like X, mile or kilometer radius around, X city. And then there's a city that's outside that range, so that you can identify, okay, do they do the extra work to search for this location and find out if it's in the target region? And you only have to include like one or two of those, one that is, one that isn't. And that's a good way to tell, like, do they go above and beyond? Are they going to be thinking about this, or are they just, going through the motions? The other thing to look for in this is, do they actually even do the test? So if you put this in the job description, a lot of times you'll get, especially if you're hiring overseas, you'll get the standard like, hey, I think I'm a great fit for this role, you should hire me. um, but they don't do what you told them that they need to do. So like immediately you can tell, at least in this case, it's maybe a bit unfair, maybe a bit hasty, but you're also like looking for someone to pay money to do work and pay attention to details. So if they're not paying attention to details, you can kind of disqualify them immediately. So this actually alone disqualifies, I would say probably 75% of the applicants initially, and then the remaining 25%, 75% of them are disqualified by just like adding a bunch of exact match full query negatives, or just adding them wrong, or missing most of them. Like, I don't mind if you miss a couple, as long as you kind of know, like, you have the right thinking about negatives. So that's one thing that I've found really helps to identify, does a person know how to actually manage an account? Obviously, reviewing search terms, adding negatives is not the end all be all of account management, but it is really a core foundational piece that if they don't get that, they're not going to get everything else. So that's the first thing I look for. The second thing I look for is their understanding of bidding strategies. So how do you understand bidding strategies? When do you use which one? Or when do you use each? And when would you adjust bids up or down? Your target up or down. Would you remove the target, and go manual? You want to be able to understand these different facets so that you can manage an account well and adjust to different circumstances. And if you have, like, if you're hiring an entry level position and you have a good PPC director, or you yourself are able to give that time and coaching, then you don't necessarily need the person to be super solid on this. But ideally, they would know enough that they're not coming to you for every decision, and they're not scared to make a decision. They're confident in their knowledge and their experience that they can say, yeah, okay, let's go ahead and actually remove, max conversions, or let's take the CPA target off because we don't have enough volume, and let's shift to manual so that we can increase impression share, et cetera. So you have this series of tests then, basically, that you pass them through. So do they know how to manage search term reports? Do they know how to add negatives? Do they know how to look for keyword opportunities? And then there's a couple levels of that. You could just give them the search terms and look for relevance, and that's generally like entry level. The more you want them to be thinking for themselves, the more you can look at like, okay, let's add in some data actually, and let's say, hey, here's our CPA target, or here's our ROAS target, here's the search terms, and then you have the data for all of them, and you pull this from a real account, and you just remove the brand names and specify like, hey, the brand isn't in this, they do or they don't want to show for competitor terms, etc. And then with all that data, you have them analyzing not just on relevance, but also on like waste or efficiency and things like that. So it's a good way to tell, even with AI, if they can use the AI well to do the job, then sure, it doesn't matter if they're using AI because they're doing the job and they're doing it well. It's really the ends justify the means as long as they can consistently replicate that success. The and as long as it's ethical. Um, the problems you run into are when they are using AI and they can't do the job, or when they're not using AI and they can't do the job. So as long as they can do the job, great. So search terms, bidding strategies. Sometimes I will, like if it's a higher level role, I'll pass them through like a strategy assessment. Like, hey, what's your understanding of strategy? How well can you look at an account and understand what it needs to grow and improve? Sometimes if you're hiring a PPC director, you're going to want to do this actually most of the time. You can train strategic thinking, but I found that it's actually one of the least common skills in agencies, even including owners. Sorry. Most agencies don't understand strategy, specifically when it comes to like which channels to choose, why, how much to allocate, what campaigns and what campaign types to use, targeting, messaging. It all just is kind of based on instinct or based on best practices or some framework that somebody else has given them. And there's no real like strategic, comprehensive strategy driving it all. And some of that is on the agency. Most of that usually is actually on the business owner, or the CMO or whoever they're serving, because technically it's their job to devise a strategy and then hire vendors to deal with execution of that strategy, because they're driving the ship or steering it. They're at the helm, and then they need people to go and hoist the mainsails and do all of the things. So getting out of my pirate stuff here, let's get back to agency stuff. So you've identified basically they can do the work. So the other step is then generally, if they pass that phase of the interview, you've got the ability to ask them for an audit. They can do the work. So now you want to see their thinking. You want to see how they look at accounts. Can they identify waste? Can they identify opportunities to grow? Most of the time, if you ask for an audit, you're going to get waste. You're gonna have people that find like, hey, you could do this better, or actually a lot of times, especially if you're hiring overseas, it's like you have all these things that are not following best practices. They do observations a lot. You don't get a lot of insights. And you know, this is not just overseas, but I do see it more overseas where, they're trained up kind of on how to do audits. And it's basically just like, here's a list of observations about your account. And these things don't align with best practices. And those best practices are often Google's best practices, which doesn't mean that you want to follow them. So, you may have good reasons. So this step also can help eliminate a lot of people who aren't going to be the best fit for your role. Sometimes you want somebody like that who's super detail oriented. They're like, yep, I paid attention to all the details in your account, and I recognize that these things are not aligned, or like maybe they catch some things in the settings that were default that you didn't switch, or that somebody, that you had working on the account didn't switch over to your preferred settings, hashtag location settings and things like that. This is helpful for understanding, okay, how do they look at an account? How do they think about an account? And ideally, so you can do this by sending them a CID or something. And you kind of should, but you should have them do two things. You should have them do an audit. You should also do an interview with them that's an hour long. You should, for the first half of it, have them do a live audit. So let them know ahead of time, like, hey, I'm going to have you looking through this account. and just give me your thoughts. I don't like, it's not a pass fail thing. I just want to see how you think about accounts, and just be really transparent with them. Like, look, this is what I'm looking for. I want to know how you think. It's not a make or break thing. You then bring them on, you pull up an account, and you grade them more or less on like how familiar are they with the platform. Can they direct, like, navigate you around well, because you're driving and they're just telling you where to go, they're navigating. And then what do they look at first? So if they're like, hey, so what's your ad copy like, that's not a great sign. If they start with conversion tracking, or like, generally conversion tracking is the first place you should start. If they look at like account structure first, that's not terrible. Sometimes if people who are good get in the weeds and they're used to working on accounts that have conversion tracking already set up, and so they're like, hey, let's look at the main metrics to pick a campaign to look into, and then, oh, this one's a bit, I'm getting red flags here, let's dig into the ad groups here and the keywords and everything. That's not terrible. It at least shows that once conversion tracking is set up, they generally are going to look at the account in an intelligent way. So either of those, generally, it's a good sign if they look at those first. If they go conversion tracking and then account structure, that's a win. So I usually will pull them on a live audit. I'll see how they think, and then I will then move on to just standard interview questions, looking specifically for, how do you handle, coaching, or like, if they're talking about things in the account, push back a little bit if there's something you disagree with. So that, I mean, if there's something you like, don't make something up, but um, push back a little bit and see how they handle it. Like, if they go real defensive and they're really antagonistic because you disagreed with them, that's a major red flag, because they're not coachable. And you want somebody, even your leaders should be coachable, and then able to coach others as well. But if you have somebody that's not coachable, they're going to be stuck in their ways. They're not going to be worth hiring, even if they know their stuff, because things change, and Google's changing all the time. You may also want to shift your strategy and how you do things, or get an account that's very different from what they're used to, and they'll try and approach it the same way. So you should always work with people who are open to learning, open to changing, open to growing, and open to being coached. So those who take correction well. And then in those interview questions, you're looking for things like, do they actually have experience? How have they handled it when they had recommendations that they knew would help the account and the client refused? What did they do instead? Are they able to think creatively and come up with solutions to reach the same point through different approaches, which can't always be done, but generally, like, are they willing to try? Because if they're just like, well, if the client won't work with their account, then I'll just do the bare minimum, and that's not ideal. So you want to kind of look in that direction. Do they know what they're doing? Are they able to think creatively, think critically? What sort of metrics are they looking at, and what conclusions are they drawing from those metrics? What are their priorities? And this gives you an idea of how they think. So first step, how do they, like, do they know their stuff? Can they actually manage the account, more or less? Next step would be, how do they look at an account? And if you have them do the live audit, and you also have them do another audit, generally at this point, like, I give the other audit if they pass the live audit stage, and I'm like, they're pretty good at this. The live audit is great for seeing how they think on the spot and quickly. But a lot of times, people, especially if they're not like people, they're more, like, analytical, kind of the less personable, like ADHD, think on the spot, kind of strategic, high level people. They're going to be potentially really good at what they do, just not on the spot. So in those cases, you could throw them with the live audit and get a bad impression when they're actually fantastic. So if they seem like they're really nervous, your goal really is to help them relax so that you can see how they really are, when they aren't as nervous. And usually I'll start with like a little bit of small talk and like trying to do something to get them to laugh and maybe talk about hobbies to get them to light up. So, I'll give an example of something, that I'm doing, like, oh man, yeah, I was just listening to music and I've got this great, concerto or punk pop, you know, song that I was listening to, and I'm just rocking out, and I just show them like, hey, I'm a real person. You don't have to be intimidated by me. I'm casual. I take this seriously, but you don't expect me to be, like this really strict person. And just try and relate to them in some way so that they relax and kind of open up, and they're more likely to, to trust you. And you can also emphasize directly, like, hey, like, again, I want to reiterate, don't don't worry about this is just to get an idea of how you look at accounts. So just walk me through it, but like, please, I'm not looking for you to like turn this account around in 30 minutes. Just let me know what you want to look at, and I'll walk through it with you. And then that way you can also kind of bring that trust and that warmth into any coaching or critiques that you may have along that live audit like process, so that they view you, also as a like a caring coach or caring teacher, instructor, mentor, whatever, and are more likely to give like an honest reaction rather than like a nervous, oh crap, I messed up this thing and now I'm not going to get the job kind of reaction. So how you execute all of this really matters. And if you're a tool, then probably just don't do this and stop watching my videos. But basically, you do the audit, you do the interviews, and then if they seem like a really good fit, pay them for an audit that is not live, on an account that's just like similar to what you would have them working on, or like just kind of mid-sized, nothing huge necessarily. I brought a guy in to do a live audit on like a $600,000 a month account. And I knew, so the role I'm hiring for, like, he's going to be working on that account. And I was like, let's just throw him in the deep end. He had a really solid like application, and he did the search terms report really well. And I was like, okay, like, he knows what he's talking about. Let's just throw him in the deep end. And I made it very clear. I was like, hey, this is huge. It's super overwhelming. If this is not like okay, let me know. And he was like, no, that's okay. And he did all the things right. So I was like, okay, cool. Let's have you do a couple of audits. And so I paid him for two audits on much smaller accounts. I did an ecom and a lead gen account, which not everybody's going to have both, but I want him to be able to look at both and get a good feel for, how he views each. And, if he leans really strong toward one versus the other, then I could have him on more ecom than lead gen. But, ideally, he'd be able to handle both well enough that I can just kind of turn it over to him. It's not like a leadership role per se. It's much more entry level, but I do want somebody who knows what they're doing. So, and this is a personal hire for my own agency. So I had him audit a couple of accounts that are much smaller, and I got a red flag. So he didn't respond. I got him read only access to two accounts, explained to my clients what was going on, and then he didn't respond for like a week. And I messaged him. I was like, hey, just looking for an update on this. And it was over a holiday weekend, and it was over, like, well, a weekend and a holiday, and like, there were a lot of extenuating circumstances, and he took forever. And so I got back on, and I was like, hey, are you giving up on this? Cool. Pull the Chris Voss, never split the difference. Like, are you giving up on this position? And he got back to me, the next day or a couple days later, and was like, hey, I'm so sorry. My laptop went down, and I had to get a new laptop. Personally, I was like, well, why didn't you just like go to a library or reach out to a friend or get on a phone or like, anything to tell me like, hey, my laptop died. I'm working on this. So proactive communication is a huge piece for me. Communication criteria is actually one of my main like hiring signals, that I'm like, okay, if you mess this up, even if you're qualified, even if you're brilliant, it's probably not going to work out, because communication is everything. if you can do a great job on the account, but then I'm like, hey, the client, really needs us to pause everything like immediately, or hey, cut the budget in half, and then you just don't respond for a week. I'm going to be jumping in and doing the work myself to make sure it happens, or I'm going to have to go and verify stuff, which then adds extra work for me, which is not why I'm paying you, right? So the concern there is, do they communicate well? Do they communicate proactively? Do they communicate consistently and professionally? Are you getting a bunch of like, oh, bro, like, okay, I don't care if you want to, if I talk that way, sure, meet me where I'm at, match my tone, my language and everything. But if I'm just, talking like this, I don't want to get a bunch of like, oh, dude, like, this is this shit, man. And then like you've got people saying things that you don't necessarily want said in front of clients, or if your kids are in the room or whatever. Like it just, or showing that they don't know how to, um, like start more professional and then ease into whatever direction they need to go for the working relationship. um, it just, generally, professionalism doesn't mean you have to change who you are, but it does mean that you should approach with caution, know your audience, and then adapt accordingly. Especially if you're client facing. In most cases, like this person's not going to be client facing, so the tone of their language and their messaging and everything, you can just kind of be like, okay, can I work with this? Is this okay? Like, would this annoy me? Or like, are they being inappropriate? Like, offensive? Most of the time, you're not going to get that, but just something to watch out for. So basically, this whole process, I got the audits back. They look good. I'm probably going to hire the guy, but with the caveat that I'm going to be very transparent and immediately and be like, hey, I almost didn't hire you because of this period. And like, I'm going to need proactive communication. And because he's 1099, like, it's less risky than if he was a W-2. So W-2, especially domestic, you can almost immediately write it off and just be like, look, if they're not willing to communicate, they know what competition is like here. And if I'm going to have to pay them, base 60, or up to like 70, 80 plus for the role, then I'm certainly not going to deal with anybody who just does not tell me ahead of time that they're going to be, a week later than expected. So um, that's something to consider. So you've got the test. Do they know what they're doing? The test. How do they look at accounts? And so can they manage accounts? Can they improve accounts or identify waste? Which is improving, but like, can they grow it as well? Find opportunities to grow. Do they think strategically, which is part of the live audit and less live audit? And then how do they communicate? And then the interview is kind of a formality. It's more just so that you can meet them and like what's the gut feel that I'm getting? Do they answer my questions satisfactorily? That's not, yeah. Um, how do I feel about them? And then, generally you're going to be doing this with a short list. So maybe 2, 3, 5 people. Generally, it's going to depend on the role and the number of applications you get and everything. I have found that running people through this process, you identify the people who are going to be outsourcing everything to AI and don't know how to QA. Because I don't care if you use AI as long as you get good results and you QA well. But like if you get the audit back and they're like, okay, so use broad match modified keywords more. I didn't see a single one in the account. It's like, okay, well, you probably used AI because that got sunset 4 years ago. And you have some signals like that, or if you see like a bunch of M dashes everywhere, AI loves M dashes, and I get that. I use very similar like type writing, but usually I'll go for like a comma or parentheses or something, because I'm not so well versed in English apparently to use M dashes. But now that's a good thing. So the concern then, if you see all that, take an extra like look deeper into it, for accuracy, for quality, and usually the live audit will help offset any of the concern about using AI, because you get a feel for how they look at things live. I mean, there are plenty of other tests you can do to figure out, okay, do these people know what they're doing, or can they use AI well to do the work, including like providing specific instructions for like RSA copy. Just being like, hey, write me, 3 ads, one for each of these ad groups. Here's a link to the website or whatever, and just get an example of how they would write ad copy, which will also tell you a decent bit about how much they're thinking about it. Because if they have good, I've written really good GPTs for writing ad copy based on specific frameworks that aim for certain things in different portions of the ad headlines. And so you have some for this thing and some for this thing and some for CTAs and whatever. But if you get AI to write your copy and you don't train it, then a lot of times, you're going to have stuff that has more than 30 characters in headlines, or you're going to have stuff that is, just like a bunch of keyword stuffing, but no actual like substance. And so you get really redundant ads serving with like 2 headlines that say the same thing basically. And it's just kind of a waste of space. So, there's all these different tests to identify, okay, how would they do the work? The problem is that the more tests you have people do, the more time they're spending on your application. And yes, the more data you have, but at the end of the day, you're going to have a bunch of stuff to grade too. So it's like teaching a high school class or a college class, and then having to grade a bunch of papers to decide, okay, you pass, you fail, you pass, this assignment and then this assignment. And then, it's like you get 6 different assignments that you have to grade and then figure out the cumulative math is like, okay, this person had the highest score, but I kind of felt better about this person. And you take the human element out of things. So I like to have, just pick 2, 3, 4, filters to make sure that you're hiring the right person, that you're identifying as well as possible. A, do they know how to use AI to do the work? Or B, can they do the work without AI? Ideally, it'd be both, because you really shouldn't ignore AI completely. Like, it's going to be a big part of our work. It already is. And a lot of people are using it to their advantage to work more efficiently, to do really good, fast work that they then come behind and QA and improve with the human touch. And that's really my favorite way to use it. But the way to look at this is, let's hire somebody that can do the work, that knows how to think about it. And that way we can train them how to use AI the way that we approve of, so that we can then create GPTs or create automations or softwares or whatever that we then have them use. And they know what the inputs should be to get the right outputs. And they know how to QA those outputs so that they don't send something to the client that is just completely wrong. So I just rambled for a long time, 37 minutes. Hopefully, I'll cut some of this out. But I just wanted to share with you some ways that you can avoid some of these problems that I'm seeing a lot of agency owners suffer through. And hopefully, this has given you some ideas, and the next person you hire can be a really good fit. So, thanks. Have a good one. Catch you next time. And let me know in the comments if you have a specific topic you want me to cover around running a PPC agency. And, I will make it gold for you. Thanks.